Imagine discovering that the safest place to be yourself was the gaze of the boy next door, and realizing that decades later, he's still there, waiting. This is a gentle love story about fear, family, and finally coming out, hand in hand with my handsome childhood crush, in small-town America. If heartfelt stories help you breathe easier, please support this channel. Subscribe, like, and share this video with someone who needs a steady voice. Drop a comment about your journey or your questions. We read everyone, and we walk beside you patiently every step. Today, you are not alone. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where winters came early and people waved from across the street before they ever asked your name. Our town was called Maplewood, where the grocery store still bagged your items in paper unless you asked otherwise, and the diner's Thursday special had been meatloaf for as long as anyone could remember. If you're listening with your morning coffee or winding down at bedtime, I hope you hear the care in my voice when I tell you this. Some stories take time to unfold. Mine took 3 decades and the courage I didn't know I had, and at the center of it there was a boy named Ryan Carter. He lived 2 houses down, on the corner lot with the climbing oak that seemed to reach right into the sky. We were kids together, then strangers for many years, and later we became a kind of home neither of us had dared to hope for. I'll guide you through it slowly, like a doctor explaining a gentle treatment plan. Step by step, breath by breath. I first noticed Ryan's smile in 5th grade. He'd bike past my house with his baseball cap loaded backward, the brim pressing against his neck, and he'd toss me a wave that felt like sunlight lingering too long. I didn't have words for it then. How could I? We were children in a place where boys were taught to keep their voices firm and their hearts guarded. Ryan's laugh had a way of letting you know that he liked you, but not in a way that scared you. It was warmth without pressure, a blanket you could step under. We shot baskets in driveways and raced down the sidewalk like we were trying to outpace our own futures. When I look back, I see that I was just trying to outrun a truth I didn't yet understand. I remember those evenings when the sky turned lazily orange, when the street smelled like cut grass and gasoline, when my dad barbecued, and my mom called us in with that tired, loving voice. And always, there was Ryan passing by. A constant in a world I would later realize had been too quiet for too long. High school arrived like a parade that marched into you whether you invited it or not. The small-town rhythms became rituals. Friday night football, powdered sugar donuts in white paper bags. The same faces at the gas station. My father was a quiet man, a postal clerk with gentle hands. My mother was a nurse who could soothe anyone with a few tender words and a peppermint from her purse. She used to say, "Sweetheart, if your heart is heavy, say it out loud and I'll help carry it." I never took her up on that. Truth stuck to the roof of my mouth like peanut butter. Ryan and I drifted in and out of friendship like sun passing behind clouds. He joined the baseball team. I joined the debate team. We still waved. Sometimes we'd sit on the curb at dusk and talk about college, futures, and everything we were expected to want. He'd say, "I think I'll study engineering," and I'd nod like a grown-up giving consent. Inside, though, I imagined packing a bag, leaving town, and learning to breathe without apologizing. That yearning frightened me. It also kept me alive. When you keep a secret long enough, it carves out a room inside you where the air gets thin. If you are listening right now and feel that pinch beneath your ribs, let's take a breath together. Inhale slowly, hold for a count of 2, exhale. You are safe. I became so skilled at smiling, there was a yearbook photo where I can hardly recognize myself. Ryan's photo was right below mine. He looked like the version of a person who knows where he's going. Maybe he didn't, but his eyes had clarity. On graduation night, he said, "Elliot, come to the after party." And I said, "I can't. My grandma's in town." That was a lie, a small lie like a pebble in your shoe. Later that summer, he left for an engineering program in Michigan. I took a scholarship to a university near Dayton, choosing pre-med because I liked the idea of being useful, of fixing what hurts. We hugged goodbye in his driveway. It was quick. His shoulder was warm, like walking past a sunny window. I watched him go. I kept walking. We did what grown-ups do before they know how to be one. We disappeared. In college, the world expanded like someone had opened a window for the first time. I learned to diagnose symptoms and chart vital signs. I learned that kindness could be practical and precise. And I learned, slowly, that my heart beat in a pattern I couldn't keep ignoring. There were moments. I remember them like highway signs, when I saw two men holding hands near a river walk and felt a steadying quiet roll through me. Or when I heard my roommate say, "You can't choose who you love," as casually as asking for the remote. But coming out felt like stepping off a cliff. In those years, I did not step. I focused on exams, on late-night coffee, on the gentle dignity of treating a volunteer clinic patient with respect. I wrote notes to my parents about classes and weather and never about the truth. At night, I'd think about Ryan sometimes, the way he used to steady the ladder while I cleaned leaves from our gutter, the way he'd say, "I got you." He probably wasn't thinking about me. That's okay. Some stories sit dormant until the season is right. After medical school, I returned to Maplewood because my mother broke her ankle and my father's blood pressure scared him into silence. You can't chart family the way you chart a patient, but you can sit at a kitchen table and listen. I opened a small clinic on Main Street, sandwiched between Henderson's Hardware and a florist who still knew everyone's birthdays. The town hadn't changed as much as the years made me think. The diner still poured coffee like it was medicine. People still used their front porches in summer. On a Thursday morning that smelled faintly of rain and cinnamon rolls, I turned from the counter at the pharmacy and nearly bumped into Ryan Carter. He was taller. His shoulders were broader. His face had those faint laugh lines that hinted at a good life lived with humility. For a moment, I forgot the many masks I wore. He smiled, his surprise softening into recognition. "Elliot," he said, "I thought you moved to the city for good." I heard myself laugh. "Seems Maplewood put something in the water," I said. We stepped aside to let a woman pass with her prescriptions, and just like that, the air between us felt familiar. Ryan had moved back after his father's heart attack, he told me. His mother needed help with the house, and he had started a small carpentry business, building porches and repairing the old Victorians that every street seemed to shelter. He asked about my clinic. I told him about the blood pressure screenings we held on Saturdays behind the hardware store, how sometimes the best medicine was a chair and a conversation. He said, "That sounds like you," and I felt something in my chest loosen, like a knot learning to trust a new pair of hands. We met for coffee the following week, then again the week after that. Neither of us mentioned the past directly. We talked about wood grain and weather patterns, about the joy of seeing a patient's blood sugar improve, about how the river swelled each spring and receded in a pattern you could set your calendar by. The town saw us around, of course. Maplewood notices. People would nod at the two of us, and sometimes I'd hear, "Good to see you back, Ryan," and "Doc, thanks for helping my brother." We wore our cordiality like coats. Underneath, a warmer weather was coming. If you're listening and wondering when the headline arrives, when the heart declares itself, rest with me here. The human body heals best when it isn't rushed, and hearts are no different. One evening on a weekday that had left me tired but grateful, Ryan stopped by the clinic as I was closing up. He'd installed new shelves at the back so we could keep donated food and hygiene kits in order. "You're doing holy work," he said in that quiet tone men in our town used when they meant it. I smiled and said, "So are you." As we locked the front door, the streetlights clicked on with that soft electric buzz. Ryan adjusted the brim of his cap. "I've been meaning to say," he began, then paused. "You know what? This can wait." I felt a small surge of bravery. "I'd rather it didn't," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough. He looked at me fully, the way he always had when we were kids, like looking at me wasn't something he had to remember to do. We walked to the park because sometimes conversations want open sky. We sat on a bench where teenagers had probably carved their initials, their hopes, their promises they half kept. Ryan took a breath, one of those grounding breaths that steady you before you step, and said, "I've spent a lot of years being what I was told I should be. I still have a lot to learn about being honest. If you're like me, I'd like to move slowly. I'd like to try." The park was quiet. A dog barked 2 streets over. I could hear the creek slipping over stones. In that stillness, my heart recognized a language it had always known. "Ryan," I said, "I am like you." I didn't explain further. I didn't offer disclaimers. It felt like opening a window. He nodded, eyes wet. He laughed, not from humor, but relief. "I used to watch you rake leaves and want to walk over," he said. But I was too scared. I figured I'd better keep moving. I said, "Me too." We sat a while longer, letting the truth rest between us like a patient finally sleeping. People imagine coming out as a single dramatic scene, but in my experience, it is a series of small conversations, each one a stitch that repairs the fabric of your life. The first person I told was my mother. She was sitting in her recliner with an ice pack on her ankle, a blanket draped over her knees. I made tea. We watched the evening news. I told her slowly, watching her face not for approval, but for understanding. I said, "Mom, there's something I want to share and I'm okay. I promise." That word, promise, had weight. I said I was gay. I told her that my heart had always known. I told her Ryan and I were spending time together. She looked at me like she used to when I brought scraped knees into the kitchen. "You are my son," she said, and her words were calm as a Sunday morning. "I love you. Thank you for telling me." She squeezed my hand. "Invite him for dinner," she added, and then, with a wry smile, "Tell him I make too much meatloaf and I need help." Relief washed over me so thoroughly I laughed like a man who was finally breathing freely. My father was quieter. He had the sort of silence that made you wonder what storms it was weathering. I told him in the garage while we changed the oil in the old Buick. The ritual steadied us. I said, "Dad, I want to talk to you about something important." He grunted, a sound men in our family used for everything from hello to, "I'm listening," I told him. He wiped his hands on a rag, eyes on the concrete floor, and then he nodded once, like he was tightening a bolt. "Son," he said, "I don't need all the words at once, but I need you to know I want to do right by you. If you're happy, and he's good to you, that's what matters to me. There are blessings that come disguised as plain speech." I thanked him. We finished the oil change, working side by side in the easy way men do when hearts are too tender for long eye contact. Later, he asked me if Ryan liked the Reds. "Because if he doesn't," he said, half smiling, "we'll have to have a talk." In that moment, I felt a bridge build itself plank by plank between us. Living your truth in a small town is not a march. It's a steady walk, the kind where you pay attention to your footing and wave to neighbors. Ryan and I kept our pace. We had dinners, nothing dramatic, old recipes and new stories. At my mother's table, Ryan listened to my father's stories about the post office, the dogs who were friendlier than their owners, the snowstorms he'd waded through. He laughed in the right places. He offered to fix a loose kitchen cabinet door. He said yes, ma'am, and no, sir, the way we were taught. On Sunday afternoons, we took drives on county roads just to watch the cornfields change color. We stopped for pie. We learned each other's quiets. He showed me how he chooses lumber, tapping it with a knuckle to hear the pitch, and I told him about a patient whose anxiety eased when she learned to breathe slower. "You're good at that," he said. "At the slow." I said, "So are you." When you hold your own truth with gentleness, it makes room for someone else to set theirs down beside it. Of course, there were awkward moments. There always are. One afternoon at the diner, an old classmate of ours raised an eyebrow when he saw us sit in a booth together. He lingered uninvited and asked more questions than conversation requires. It stung the way a splinter stings. But then the waitress, Janet, who'd been pouring coffee in this town since the year I learned to drive, set 2 slices of cherry pie in front of us and said, "On the house," in a tone that didn't invite debate. Later, a teenage boy lingered by our table and mumbled, "Thanks for being like this here." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. Small towns can be slower to shift, but they know how to care once they decide to. Ryan and I learned to nod at kindness like it was weather. Not a miracle, not a breach, but something you plan for with gratitude. And when we faced an unkind word, and we did, twice from people with tender hurts of their own, we answered with the steady calm my mother taught me. "Thank you for sharing," I'd say. "We're going to keep treating each other kindly. If you're following along and wondering how we finally gave ourselves the permission to call this a love story, it happened in everyday light. We were at the hardware store buying screws and a new broom for my clinic. The owner, Mr. Henderson, had known us since we were too small to reach the counter. He looked up, smiled, and said, "You boys need a level?" Ryan laughed. "Always," he said. We walked out to the truck, our hands almost touching, but still not quite. On Main Street, in front of the florist window full of early spring tulips, Ryan reached over and took my hand. It was not dramatic or loud. It didn't need to be. He squeezed once. I squeezed back. Two men, mid-30s, simply choosing not to hide. Someone drove by and waved. Another person looked, then looked away. We stood there and let that be. Later, in the truck, Ryan said, "I used to think that being brave always looked like shouting. I like this better." I said, "Me too." The human heart doesn't always want a declaration. Often it wants a steady hand on a quiet afternoon. Our town has a community fair every June. Booths line the park. There's a pie contest and a ring toss. This year, the committee asked if my clinic wanted a table for blood pressure checks. I said yes. Ryan built a portable sign that read, "Free checkups today," and he stained it the color of warm tea. The day dawned cool. We set up under a maple tree. People came by for a squeeze of the cuff and a conversation. Some asked about nutrition. Some asked about their grandchildren. Some just sat because sitting in front of a kind listener is a kind of medicine. At midday, Allison, a woman we knew from school, stopped by with her 2 little boys. She looked at me and looked at Ryan and said, "It's good to see you both. You look like yourselves." Then she grinned and asked her youngest to let me listen to his heart with my stethoscope. The little boy giggled and said, "It sounds like a drum." Ryan winked and said, "Best drum in town." The moment was simple. Dignity is often quiet. Love, too. Coming out to the town happened without a single announcement. It was in our heads held higher. It was in the way my father introduced Ryan at the 4th of July barbecue. "This is Ryan, my son's partner, and if you compliment his ribs, he'll teach you how he built the grill." The word partner landed like a blessing. My father cleared his throat and looked off toward the yard. It was his way of not making a fuss. My mother handed Ryan a plate and said, "You're too thin," a phrase that in our family translates to, "I take care of you now." He laughed and took the extra corn on the cob. At sunset, as sparklers hissed and kids drew light trails in the dusk, Ryan touched my elbow lightly, an anchor in a sea of noise, and we measured the progress we had made by the way we were breathing. Slow in, slow out. After the fireworks, Mrs. Carver, our old English teacher, walked up and hugged us both. "I always knew you were good men," she said. "I'm so glad you're good men together." Words can lay hands on your heart and mend it where it's thinnest. In the months that followed, we learned to be ordinary together, which after years of hiding felt extraordinary. Ryan would start his mornings early, coffee in a thermos, measuring twice, cutting once, leaving sawdust in the folds of his jeans. I packed my lunch and rounded-in exam rooms painted a shade of blue chosen for its calm. At night, we traded stories of our days. He talked about a porch step that wouldn't sit flush, how some patience and a shim solved it. I talked about Mrs. Palmer, whose blood sugar improved when her daughter moved back in and started cooking with her. "It's the things you can't write on a prescription pad that often heal," I told him, and he nodded like a man who understood that wood, like people, needs more listening than force. We took up gardening because we both needed to see something small, tended, and green. We planted tomatoes. We argued about basil. We laughed when the neighborhood squirrels made off with the strawberries. We went to the movies and sometimes sat in the back row, not to hide, but to lean into each other without an audience. One evening, the sky turned the color of a bruise and thunder rolled in from the west. The power flickered out just as I finished charting the day's notes. Ryan lit candles, and we sat on the living room floor, listening to rain drum the roof. Storms have a way of making you honest. In their gathered hush, he told me about his father, how the man's expectations had weighed him down, how grief had complicated love. "I'm still learning how to forgive him," he said. I said, "Forgiveness is a slow medicine. We take it in doses." He smiled, that tired, grateful smile of a person who finally feels sheltered. I told him about the boy I had been, the one who couldn't step into his own room without turning on every light. We shared the stories we had carried alone for too long. When the storm passed, the house felt new, not because anything had changed, but because we had. Before bed, he kissed my forehead, an old-fashioned gesture that felt like a promise you write in pen because you expect it to last. I want to tell you about the day we visited my grandmother's grave. It sits on a hill overlooking the town pond where geese honk like they're telling jokes no one else gets. My grandmother loved Ryan when we were younger. She'd bake him cookies because he'd always carry her groceries from the car without being asked. After we brushed the leaves from her headstone and set a small bouquet from the florist, we sat on the grass and talked quietly. I thanked her in my head for raising my mother, who knew how to hold a heart without squeezing it. Ryan took my hand and, looking out at the water, said, "I used to be afraid I would disappoint everyone I love if I let them see me." I said, "And now?" He squeezed lightly. "Now I think I'd disappoint myself if I continued to hide." Grief and joy can sit side by side on a blanket in a cemetery and get along. If you're hearing this and thinking about the people you've lost and the truths you haven't spoken, please know love reaches across beginnings and ends and says, "Kindly, I'm still here. There are practical things, too, when you build a life with someone." We drew up wills, not because we were forecasting endings, but because we wanted to be responsible. We divided chores like adults who understand that fairness is a living practice. Ryan fixed the leaky faucet I kept pretending I didn't hear. I made sure his tetanus shot was up to date. We learned each other's allergies and favorite songs. He sings a little off-key, but with sincerity, and that is my favorite way to be serenaded. On Sundays, we called my parents, then his mother. She was quieter, still learning what our life was. She asked questions that softened month by month. "Do you like my pot roast?" She asked him once, and he said, "I do, Mom, and so does Elliot." And I heard her smile down the line. One night she invited us both for dinner. She set a plate with cucumbers because she remembered I liked them. Kindness finds its way. It just sometimes takes the scenic route. I want to pause and say this directly, like a physician offering simple, steady advice. You are allowed to take your time. Some folks come out in one bright afternoon because they are ready and their world meets them with open arms. Others need years. Both are right. I needed years. Ryan did too. And when the day came that we wanted the world to know us, one small piece at a time, we chose moments we could feel with our feet. We chose the farmer's market hand squeeze. We chose the slow dance in his living room with the curtains open. We chose to tell the barber, the librarian, the neighbor who never forgets garbage day. And we watched people recalibrate what they thought they knew with the kindness we extended them as they did. It's amazing what happens when you trust a town to be better than its loudest grumbles. Many people rose to the occasion. A few did not. And still the earth turned, the seasons changed, and the better story outlasted the old one. There was a high school reunion we almost didn't attend. Those gymnasium lights are not kind, not to wrinkles or to old roles we don't want to play again. But we went. We arrived together, hands not quite touching at first, then touching once the sight of old banners and unfamiliar faces made the past seem like a movie we had both watched but no longer lived in. We shook hands. We asked about children and careers. A former teammate of Ryan's clapped him on the shoulder and said, "I always thought you were the brave one." And I saw the complicated blessing of that land on him. Later, Mrs. Carver, the same English teacher, asked us to dance to a song from our senior year. We did. People looked, then smiled. And then, as happens at reunions, everyone felt their age and sat down, and the world kept spinning. On the way out, a man who had once teased me in the locker room stopped us. He stammered, then said, "I've had a son come out. I wish I'd known better then. If I was hard on you, I'm sorry." Ryan shook his hand. I nodded. Forgiveness is not a one-time act, but a practice. That night, we slept easier. Life gives you certain afternoons that glow in your memory like a lamp left on for you in a window. One of mine is the day Ryan finished building a little bench for the front porch. It was simple, clean lines, sturdy legs. He sanded it smooth and put it in the sun to warm the wood. I brought 2 glasses of iced tea. We sat side by side, letting the town move past us in slow motion. Kids rode bikes. A couple walked their dog. Janet from the diner waved and called out, "Save me a seat." Ryan leaned back and said, "I never thought I'd get this." "What's this?" I asked. He gestured toward the street. "This," he said, "a life that doesn't feel like pretending." I understood. We didn't need grand gestures. The bench, the tea, the view, these were enough. Somewhere, a baseball game played on a radio. Somewhere, our mothers were on the phone planning Thanksgiving side dishes. Somewhere, the version of me that had spent years afraid had finally been allowed to sit down and rest. We did face a sudden storm we didn't expect. My father had a minor stroke late in the fall. It was small, a gentle wake-up call more than a catastrophe, but in the hospital room's hum, fear visited like an unwelcome relative. I slipped into doctor mode, reading charts, asking questions with calm precision. Ryan sat with my mother, making sure she ate, rubbing her shoulders with the respect of a son who knows caregivers need care. My father looked at me, face uneven in its newness, and whispered, "Keep doing good." We did. We set up physical therapy. We adjusted his diet. We simplified the living room. For a month, we all walked a narrower path. In those weeks, no one asked about labels. They asked for rides, meals, company. Ryan answered yes. My father recovered beautifully. One afternoon, he took Ryan's hand and said, "Thank you, son." The word son stood between them like a bridge further strengthened, a structure that could carry weight. In the quiet after, I stepped outside and cried, not from sadness, but from the relief that comes when storms pass and leave your house still standing. We built traditions. We carved pumpkins and roasted the seeds. We learned the right ratio of cocoa powder to sugar to make hot chocolate the way Ryan's grandmother had. We hung a wreath that my mother insisted needed more ribbon, and then we left it as it was, imperfect and ours. For New Year's Eve, we invited a few friends. We toasted with sparkling cider because Ryan had an early job the next morning. We went to bed at 10, laughing like responsible men. In spring, we planted more tomatoes. They got blight. We mourned the tomatoes and tried again. You learn with time that a life together is mostly about the art of trying again. Gentle persistence, ready laughter, the willingness to admit when you are wrong, and the grace to be wronged without keeping score. When we argued, and we did, about money, about chores, about what it meant to be out enough, we took breaks before words turned into defenses. "I'm not your enemy," Ryan would say, and it was our cue to soften. This is, perhaps, the most adult love lesson I've learned. Choose each other on the hard days most of all. Sometimes I think about the boys we were and the men we are. If I could send a postcard back in time, I would not promise those boys that the path is simple. I would promise them it is worthy. I would tell them that the world is wider and kinder than the first 5 voices you hear about it, and that even in a town where traditions are pressed like leaves in a book, new pages are always waiting. I would tell young me that hiding is a skill that kept you safe once, and letting go of a skill when you no longer need it is progress. I'd tell young Ryan that handsome is not a shield, and that gentle is a strength. I'd show them a photograph of 2 men on a porch bench, hands resting on the wood between them, and I'd write, in the clear block letters of a doctor filling out a form, "You are allowed to be here." If you are listening because you are thinking of coming out, or because you love someone who is, here is what our story taught me. Find one person you trust. Tell them first. Choose a time when your body feels steady. Write it down if you need to. Make tea. Tell the truth. Let silence do some of the work because it will. Notice whose faces soften. Notice whose eyes harden. Make room for both and keep choosing the soft. Remember to eat. Remember to rest. Give grace to those who need time, and give distance to those who would wound you. Come out to yourself again and again. Each morning you look in the mirror and choose kindness toward the person who looks back. And if you have a handsome childhood crush still somewhere in your life, consider that maybe the thing you fear is a doorway and not a wall. Step through at your pace. The room beyond is brighter than you think. We never had a dramatic proposal or a timeline that matched anyone else's. What we had instead was a long, steady coming home. One evening in late summer, we walked down to the river. The sky was clear, the air warm like the inside of a pocket. We talked about whether we needed a ceremony or a paper. "I love the idea of promises made out loud," Ryan said. "But I don't want to invite people who still are deciding if they see us." "Then let's invite the ones who already do," I said, "and leave the door open. They can join when they're ready." We planned a simple gathering for the fall, in the park, near the bench where we had told the truth the first time. The day came. My mother arranged flowers. My father wore a tie he had to be coaxed into. Janet from the diner brought pie, unasked. Mrs. Carver read a poem about enduring tenderness. We looked at each other with the kind of attention that feels like a blessing. We promised to be gentle, to be honest, to apologize quickly, to tidy up after ourselves and after our anger. We held each other's hands. The town, in its way, held us too. People will ask, "Are you happy?" It's a fair question. Though I think about happiness as a candle, we tend more than a prize we win. Some days the flame is bright. Some days it flickers. We cup our hands around it and keep walking. And yes, the truth is I am happy. Happy enough to weather the days that are ordinary without letting them feel dull. Happy enough to sit in a doctor's office waiting room and hold Ryan's hand while he gets stitches on his thumb and not feel the need to let go when a stranger walks in. Happy enough to laugh in the frozen foods aisle when his cart takes the corner too wide. Happy enough to wake up and not start the day with a lie. That is a particular kind of joy we don't talk about enough. The joy of not hiding. The joy of being seen by the person who knows the shape of your hand and the sound your footsteps make when you're tired. There is no finish line to this story because we are still living it. There is, however, a point I return to often, like a good, reliable stretch of road. I came out with my handsome childhood crush, and in doing so, I came home to myself. If you are younger or older, if your town is larger or smaller, if your church is welcoming or wary, if your family nods or needs time, if your voice shakes or rises steady, your story can be yours. It does not have to sound like mine. It just has to sound like you. In Maplewood, people learned to wave at us as we walked by, not because we were a novelty, but because we were part of the neighborhood. We waved back. We carry groceries for the neighbor we once worried would disapprove, and he says thank you like he always did. We plant another tomato even if last year's failed. We sit on the bench Ryan built and watch our street hold all the different lives it has room for. We breathe. We remember that kindness is an everyday practice. And when the sun sets and the porch light clicks on, we go inside together. And the house, the heart, feels lived in and whole.